Hey folks, Chris here from LazyFA.com. One of the reasons that I originally built LazyFA was to give myself the ability to see financial trends visually over time without having to go into the SEC filings and extract a bunch of data, put it into an Excel spreadsheet or some sort of website and calculate those trends on my own. I wanted the computer to do it for me. So the reason that I built LazyFA originally was to visualize these trends over time. And to this day, these charts that are strewn across the entire site have been one of the main components of LazyFA. So I wanted to take some time to go through the functionality of these charts and what they provide for you. Now, there are a few different types of charts on LazyFA, so I'm going to go through each individual type. As you can see, I've got a bunch of tabs open across the top of the browser here, and I'm going to go through each type of chart and show you the options on each individual one. The first type of chart is all over the dashboard, and this is sort of where everybody spends the majority of their time if they're just looking for financial trends in the SEC filings or in the financial statements. They'll spend most of their time here on the dashboard, and these charts give you the ability to select any line item from any financial statement and plot them out over time using these drop downs. If you click on the item that you've plotted, you can enable and disable it, so that's pretty straightforward. And then hovering over the charts will show you the exact data for that particular time period. Now, if you notice here in the box that pops up when you're hovering over one of these bars, it says click for filing or control click for XBRL. So if you want to cross-check the data that is on this chart with the SEC filing that it came from, you can simply click the bar to open up the SEC filing. Or if you want to go directly to the financial statement, then just hold Control and click, and that will open up the XBRL version where you can easily click into the financial statements, look at the statement of operations or comprehensive income or whichever financial statement you are looking at. This is an easy way to cross-check the data with the SEC filing that it came from. So this functionality to click the bars on the chart is primarily on the dashboard, but it is scattered throughout the rest of the site in a couple of different places. So if you hover over these bars and you see the option to click, then you can do that on that particular chart. So it doesn't exist on all charts, but it is on almost all of them on the dashboard, and it's scattered throughout the rest of the site as well. In the top right of the chart, you can switch the data that is plotted on it between annual data, quarterly data, trailing 12 months, and switch it between a bar or a line chart. And one of the other things that people actually don't usually know about these charts is that they are scrollable. So if you zoom in, if you scroll, you can zoom in and zoom out, and then also they are panable. So if you're looking at quarterly data and it doesn't look like much when you're looking at it in this way or trailing 12 months and it's hard to see all the individual points, you can scroll to zoom in and click and drag to pan across the charts. And this is functionality that exists across the entire site. Almost every single chart has the ability to scroll and zoom in and zoom out like this. Across the top of the dashboard here, you'll see that there are some buttons that look similar to the ones that are on the upper right of the chart. These ones will switch every chart that is displayed on the dashboard to either annual, quarterly, or trailing 12-month data, and can switch them all between bar and line charts accordingly. So if you prefer looking at them as bar charts, just click on bar, it will switch them all to bar charts. Same thing for line charts. If you're more of a line chart person and you visualize things that way, that option is there for you as well. So that covers most of the functionality for the dashboard charts. These other tabs are laid out in exactly the same way. They all have pretty much the same functionality, annual, quarterly, trailing 12-month data. And this theme of having this sort of control panel in the upper right-hand corner of the chart is consistent throughout the entire site. So you'll see that on the other charts that we look at as well. Now, there's one other thing that was recently added to the site, and that was the ability to switch between the native and US dollar currency if you're looking at a foreign company. By default, LazyFA will convert everything to US dollars, but if you do want to look at the values in their native currency, for example, here we're looking at Alibaba, which has a native currency of Chinese yuan. So if you want to look at it in the native currency, then that option will be available to you if it is a foreign company. So it's easy to switch back and forth between US dollars and native currency on those companies. Now you might notice also that because this is a foreign company, the annual, quarterly, and trailing 12-month data buttons are missing, and that's because foreign companies have different reporting requirements. They don't have to report quarterly depending on which country they're from, so we don't provide the data for quarterly filings for all foreign companies. However, the option is still there at the top, and on some companies, particularly the bigger ones and the more well-known companies like Alibaba, even if it's a foreign ticker, you can still get trailing 12-month and quarterly data by looking at them from this perspective. But just keep in mind that if you are looking at a foreign company, and that'll be designated by this little red F here right at the top left of the screen, if you see that, it means you're looking at a company that is headquartered outside the United States, but it trades on a US exchange. So we do have data for it, but some data might be missing. It might be less accurate due to the different accounting standards or the different reporting requirements. So it's important to keep that in mind as you are analyzing it. All right, so let's move on to the next type of chart. The next type of chart that you're going to see on LazyFA is a growth chart. And you'll see that these growth charts have a couple of different options. You still have the annual, quarterly, and trailing 12-month data options, like always, unless it's a foreign company, in which case those won't be available on all companies. But you also have two different modes here, period over period and sequential mode. And this is something that is not really well documented on LazyFA, so I do want to spend a moment to go over how this works. To simplify it, I'm going to look at just revenue. So I'm going to take cost of revenue off of both of these charts, and I'm going to look at quarterly data only. We'll look at quarterly data here. So I'm going to take cost of revenue off of both of these. So I'm going to look at only revenue on both of these charts, and I'm going to look at quarterly data to demonstrate the difference between sequential mode and period over period mode. If you're familiar with reading financial statements, you'll know that normally when you look at quarterly growth, you don't want to necessarily look at quarter over quarter, especially with seasonal companies like Apple, like we're looking at right now, because quarter over quarter might be deceptive if the company has, a big quarter in quarter 4 and then a small quarter in Q1 of the next year, which is very common with companies that have like a big holiday season or something like that. So normally you want to compare the quarter this year to the same quarter last year, and that is what period over period mode is for. So if you click on period over period mode on these growth charts, what this is actually showing you, if we zoom in and look at the most recent period over period data, you see revenue growth of 10.92%. What that's telling you is that in June of 2020, they reported 59.69 billion of revenue, and in June of 2019, 53.81 billion. So the quarter over quarter growth is 10.92%. And that is primarily what you want to focus on when you are analyzing quarterly growth, and that's why this period over period mode exists. Sequential mode, on the other hand, compares the period to the period directly before it on the chart. So again, if we go here and we look at 2020 June 30th, so Q2 of 2020 or whatever quarter this was for Apple, you see 2.35%. That's because it's comparing these two data points, 59.69 billion versus 58.31 billion. So the growth here is significantly different, and you can also see that when they go from Q4 of 2019 to Q1 of 2020, there's a huge negative growth of 36.49%, but that's very deceptive because that's not actually what's going on here. It's just the seasonality of Apple's revenue curve. So this is the other type of chart that you're going to see strewn throughout LazyFA, are these growth charts, and the period over period mode versus sequential mode gives you a way to either compare literally the previous period to the period that you're looking at versus comparing the period you're looking at to the same period in the previous year or previous period. So if you're looking at an annual chart, if for whatever reason you want to look at period over period from 4 years ago, what it will do is look at 2019 12/31 versus 2015 12/31. So it'll go back 4 periods on the chart because normally you want to use this on quarterly data, so you want to look back 4 quarters to find the previous period. The next type of chart you're going to see on LazyFA shows up in the red flag analysis portion of the site, and this is a distribution chart. As you can see, these distribution charts have the same options for annual, quarterly, or TTM data. The bottom portion of the chart can be either a bar chart or a line chart. And if you hover over the bottom portion of the chart, you can actually update the pie chart to see what the distribution was like at any point in time. So this is really useful for looking at things like insider ownership, asset distributions, liability distributions. If you want to see how the company's debt load is changing over time, this type of chart is really useful for that. So that's what these are for. You don't have to do anything in order for the pie chart to update. It will do so just by hovering over those individual points. So one thing that I have noticed, which is kind of a bug in LazyFA, is that if you are hovering over one point and you quickly drag to move off of this lower chart, then you end up actually hovering over one of the previous points. So at some point I may actually make it so that you need to click these points in order to update the chart. But in the meantime, it's good to just be aware of that, because you might have the most recent year highlighted and then you quickly drag over to investigate it and you see that now you are looking at 2009 data. And that's just a function of the fact that the chart updates automatically when you hover. So just be aware of that as you're using these distribution charts. Now there is one other type of chart that has the same layout, and this shows up in the manipulation monitor, particularly on the Bentons Law tab. And if you're not familiar with Bentons Law, this is a fraud detection algorithm that basically looks at the number of times a particular leading digit shows up on the financial statement, and it checks whether the distribution of the company's financial statements matches what should be the expected distribution, which is 30.1% ones, 17.6% twos, and so on and so forth for 1 through 9. So this is the only type of chart on the site where changing annual, quarterly, and trailing 12-month data will not actually change the layout of the chart. What it changes instead is which data it is using to calculate how closely it follows the distribution. So if you're looking at annual data, it's pulling in all of the financial data off of the annual financial statements and looking at the frequency of ones, twos, threes, and fours, and so on. If you use quarterly data, then it is pulling the quarterly financial statement. So there's more data that goes into this distribution when you look at quarterly data. So I personally like to use quarterly or trailing 12 month on this detection algorithm just because you have more numbers to look at. And the way this chart is laid out is the bars show you Apple's percent of the total numbers that showed up on their financial statement. So in this case, Apple's annual data, if we look at annual, has 30.72% ones as leading digits. The expected value is 30.1% based on Bentons Law, and that's this distribution that is expected based on this this detection algorithm. And the red line here at the bottom is the deviation from the norm. So Apple has 30.72%. The expected value is 30.1, so the deviation is 0.62%. Now, what you want to look for is if there is a large deviation, that can be a red flag that the company is manipulating the financial statements. And again, on all of these charts, if you click on any of the items, you can take them off the chart, put them back on, so on and so forth. And that is pretty straightforward. So this is analyzing the annual income statements here at the top. This analyzes the balance sheet data and then the cash flow statement data. And then we combine all statements together to look at the company as a whole, considering all of their financial data. So probably the most accurate information that you're going to get is by looking at all financial statements on a quarterly data distribution. You can see here there's 4,518 data points that were put into this analysis. And you can see that as you analyze more and more data, a good company like Apple will get closer and closer to the normal distribution versus looking at, say, just the annual distribution of the income statement. There's a lot more deviation from the norm here. This red line is fluctuating a lot more because there's just not as much data. So I will make another video about the manipulation monitor and all the other stuff that it can show you, but I wanted to at least cover the charts on this page because the A, Q, and T buttons function a little bit differently on this tool. There are two more types of charts on LazyFA. One of them is on the Insiders tab of the Insiders and Institutions tool, and that is similar to the asset and liability distribution charts on the red flag analysis for the balance sheet. These two charts show you the breakdown of insider ownership of the company's stock. And it's broken into derivative and non-derivative holdings distribution, so things like options versus literal shares of stock or units, which are non-derivatives. Again, on these charts, you can change the bottom chart to either a bar or a line chart. Personally, I prefer to look at these as line charts. And all of the names of the insiders across the top are clickable, so you can remove them from the chart if they no longer apply, like Steve Jobs, Arthur Levinson is still part of the company, and so on and so forth, right? So if they don't apply anymore, then you can remove them from the chart so that they're not throwing off the rest of the data. But the idea here is to analyze how the insider ownership is changing over time. So as you hover over these points at the bottom, you can see the individual ownership of each insider and how it's changing over time. If you click on any one of these points, you can update the distribution at that time to see what it looked like at that point. So similar to the asset and liability distribution charts on the red flag analysis, these holdings distribution charts can be really useful for interpreting how the company's ownership is changing over time, and if there are any outliers or big spikes in ownership that might be either a red flag or possibly a bullish or a bearish indicator. If you do want more information about any one of these boxes, you can simply click on it to zoom in, and that will center that individual box. And then to recenter the entire thing, just go over and click on the individual point, and that will bring everything back to normal. So that's the non-derivative distribution chart, and then the top 10 derivative holdings distribution chart is exactly the same, except it is derivative holdings as opposed to non-derivative holdings. All right, and the last type of chart that shows up on LazyFA, outside of the chart machine and Fin3D, which I will do a separate video for, is the institutional behavior charts. And these charts function similarly to the rest of the charts on LazyFA, they just have some different options at the top. So there is no breakdown between annual, quarterly, or trailing 12-month data for these particular types of charts, but what you can do is change between looking at the number of units versus looking at the value of those units. So if we look at UBS Group here holding call options on Apple, the number of units that they're currently holding is 1.42 million, but looking at them as value gives you the actual value or potential value of those units. So this is really useful for determining whether a institution is accumulating a lot of value in a company's shares or in call options or put options or warrants or whatever else, even though their actual holdings of those units or of those security types might actually be going down. So looking at the options here across the top, there's a few different things that you can do. You have the institutions box here, which you can search 6,500 plus institutions to find the particular one that you're looking for if you're interested in a specific institution, or if you are looking primarily at the top 10 holders, then those will be listed here. and you can look those up. That's what the defaults are here in the institutions box. So if we look at Sumitomo Mitsui Trust Holdings Incorporated here, they don't have any call options. They don't have any put options. They pretty much just own shares. And we can choose between looking at those in terms of their value or in terms of the number of units that they're holding. If you are looking at two different institutions and you want to compare the ownership of two different institutions together, then you can put the individual institutions on these charts. So we can look at, say, Sumitomo's holdings of shares here, and then set this one on common shares and look at UBS Group. And now we can compare the two together side by side, looking at them both in terms of units or in terms of value, and again as bar or line charts. Similarly to the dashboard, if you have one particular institution that owns a bunch of different security types, for example, UBS owns call options, put options, and common stock, then if you don't want to scroll down the page in order to find out what all the other things that they own are, you can change all the charts here at the top by just selecting common shares or fund units, call options, put options, and that will change all of the charts to that particular thing. So if you want to compare call options for, say, the top 10 holders, you set this on call options, change this to Sumitomo, change this one to UBS, change this one to Simplex, whatever you want to do, and then compare them all as value, as units, bar charts, line charts, or however you want to visualize it. So the institutional behavior portion functions a little bit differently than the rest of the site, but as you can see, the layout of the charts is pretty similar. All right, so that's it, guys. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions about these charts or about any of the other features on LazyFA, feel free to drop me a line in the comments, and I will see you next time.